the intention of this is not to be a sob story or a woe is me story or an inspirational story. It's not that at all. I try to use my experiences as an example of things that other people go through but don't necessarily talk about. And I think that it also highlights, the purpose of this story is to sort of highlight a need in society and to explain that how quickly things can escalate to the point of no return in essence. So with all that said, I'll jump straight into the story, my story I guess. So suicide has been a familiar face for me for quite some time. When I was about 13 years old, my best friend at the time told me that she tried to take her life at school. As 13 years old, as a 13-year-old even, you can imagine that, you know, what do you do when someone says to you, I tried to take my life at school? So I was overwhelmed but knew that I had to do something. I could just ignore the fact that my friend had opened up to me and told me that she was going through this. So I asked her if she wanted to see a counsellor. She didn't. I went to a counsellor on her behalf to say, hey look, my friend, this is what she tried to do, how can I help her? And that counsellor is still at Westminster, which is, I'm doing some work back at Westminster. But I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just ignore the fact that this was going on in my friend's life. Fast forward a couple of years and I started to struggle myself. When I was 15 years old, that's when I started to self-harm. And looking back in retrospect, that all probably started because I was struggling with my sexuality and I didn't know it at the time. We think that we live in, or we do live in a more accepting society now, but 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't always the case. When I was about 8 years old, I remember my Oma at the time said to all of us grandchildren, if any of you guys are gay, I'm going to disown you. Now, as an 8-year-old, you internalise that as, oh, being gay is wrong. And so you go through life thinking, yep, being gay is wrong, and you try to convince yourself that you're not. And so for many years, I was like, nope, I'm straight. Was a massive homophobe, and they say that most people that are homophobic end up being gay. Case in point right here. And so I really struggled with that. I really struggled because it felt like no matter how well I did in school, no matter what my grades were, no matter how well I was doing in soccer, there was still this component of me that wasn't good enough. Who here in this room can relate to those feelings of not feeling good enough? Probably most of us, right? And society preys on the fact that we all don't feel like we're good enough. Whether that's because you're struggling with sexuality, whether that's because of your family expectations, whether that's because it's just society and whatever else, we've all experienced that probably to some degree. So that started when I was 15 years old. When I was 17 in year 12, I went through a difficult breakup. Breakups are difficult, I think. And I really struggled. I went to my school counsellor, and I remember being so hesitant to tell her that I was dating a girl. And it's because she was a religious teacher, and naturally with religion comes judgment, or often it can. And so I expected the minute that I said, oh yeah, I was dating a girl, that there would be some form of bodily change with her. There'd be some sort of reaction. But in that moment, when I told her that, I was dating a girl, there was absolutely no change in her behaviour. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt accepted. And this person was Liz Collins. She's now the head of wellbeing at Westminster, and I wrote her a letter a couple of years ago to just thank her for that, because acceptance has now been one of my core values that I hold near and dear to myself. So that was 17, then went to America when I was 18, and living life, I got to be whoever I wanted to be. I was living in a different country, didn't have to report to anyone. I could be myself, but I still had this underarching feeling that I didn't belong, whether it was with my teammates, which is something that I felt growing up. So growing up with my family, I had twin brothers and I had parents, and I always felt like I was sort of the fifth wheel. My brothers had each other, my parents had each other, and then there was me. There was this kid who was, struggling with her sexuality, that didn't feel like she belonged in a family. I always sought out older people, whether it was parents' friends, whether it was my brother's friends, because I was just trying to fit in. And I think those are feelings that a lot of us experience when we're in school, when we're in our late teens, early 20s. We're trying to figure out our tribe. We're trying to figure out who are the people that we connect to the most. And often it's a very, very lonely time, because you're trying to figure out, you're conflicted with wanting to be yourself, but with being yourself, you might get rejected for yourself, and then there's also a desire to fit in. And so there's a conflict. And so often we're, struggling with those feelings internally, and for me, I felt like I didn't belong. Haven't felt like I belonged growing up. And when I was in college, didn't feel like I belonged. Felt like what I expected of my teammates was too much. My first year that I was over there, probably within 6 weeks of being there, I did my first ACL. But thought to myself, this is a good challenge. I'll work back, I'll get stronger, and whatever else. So I busted my ass off for the 10 months that I had rehab. Then when I got back to playing, I was doing extra sessions every single week. To the point where 2 months after I returned, I then had a stress fracture in my foot. So after being out for 10 and a half months, then I was out for another 5 months with a stress fracture. And at that point, I became extremely negative, to the point where my teammates hated me. They coined me Negative Nancy, because everything that came out of my mouth was just negative. We got knocked out of the quarterfinals, and everyone was, happy about the season that we had, and said, yep, we've had a successful season. And there was me being like, what do you mean successful? We got knocked out in the quarterfinals. We didn't achieve any of the goals that we set out to achieve. How can that be success? And little did I know that I was becoming unbearable to be around, because everything that I was saying was negative. And it wasn't until one of my professors in college at the time said to me, she's like, Nicole, I think you're depressed. And I was like, I'm not sad though. And I felt very angry. I was angry all the time. And she said, depression doesn't necessarily show itself in sadness. It can portray itself in anger and negativity. And I guess that's what I sort of experienced. And not being able to exercise didn't help. So who here has suffered an injury and has felt pretty under the weather once they've been injured? Yep. So when you get injured, what happens is you go through a drug withdrawal. Not only are you not getting the endorphins from exercise, but you're not getting the serotonin from feeling valued. You're not getting the dopamine from the competition. You're not getting the oxytocin from feeling loved from your teammates. And so with all of that, how can you possibly be mentally healthy when you're not getting any natural chemicals that you would from the sport that you love? Or maybe the sport was your coping mechanism. Now all of a sudden you don't have that. They say that exercise is prescribed to alleviate depressive symptoms. Well, what do you do when you can't exercise? What do you do when your exercise is your primary sense of identity? And now all of a sudden you're in an identity crisis. So that was my second year when I was in the States. Then third year I had an ankle injury pretty early on, but managed to overcome that. Had a really, really good season my junior year leading into my senior year. And then was selected for a couple of teams. Got myself back I was in a relationship. I was named captain finally, so after 3 years of working for that leadership position, I was finally named captain. Granted though, my coach made me captain with 3 other captains, so I really didn't actually have a lot of say, and I think that was his way of keeping me quiet. Not sure that really worked. And so things were looking up, I had all of this promise and all this hope and expectation for a really good senior year. I was really excited about being in a relationship because it was the first time since year 12 back in Westminster. And then my partner at the time, she had just lost her mum earlier that year. So for the start of the relationship, what ended up happening was that she couldn't be there for herself because she was processing the loss of her mum, which I couldn't begin to imagine what that would have been like. And so what would happen is she would finish work and she would go out and she would drink. But I could be there emotionally because I had the emotional resources to be there. So I would sit up and talk to her all night long while she was drinking, and we would have conversations, quite heavy conversations. But I would be there. I would go pick her up at 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, which was then affecting my sleep. And I didn't know it at the time that it was having that effect on me. I also then had a really good friend who was struggling with an eating disorder that no one else knew about, and it only became a problem when she fainted during a game, and everyone couldn't understand what was going on with her, but I knew. So I knew that I then had to tell the athletic trainer, because it became, it was to do with her health and well-being, told the athletic trainer that I was concerned that this is what she had told me. I told her what she was messaging me because what she was telling me and what she was telling the coaches and the training staff were two completely different things. And not only did she struggle with an eating disorder, but she also struggled with depression. And when you're depressed, you feel like you're not worthy of being cared about. And so she didn't want to make it a big deal to her coaches or her trainer because she didn't think that she was important enough. And so then I, spoke to the other captains. I said, look, I'm really worried about my teammate, and I think that it's really important that she doesn't play tomorrow, because in college you play on the Friday night and you play on the Sunday afternoon. It's a very short turnaround. She fainted on the Friday night, couldn't make it through the training on the Saturday morning, and I said, look, there's no way that she can play on Sunday. Spoke to the captain, spoke to the coach and said, look, she can't play. I'm really worried about her well-being. Coach said, yep, I care more about these players' health than I do about winning. And I was like, awesome, after 3 years, my coach is finally listening to me. I felt elated, and I was telling my good friends, I was telling my parents, like how excited I was that my coach was finally listening to me. Sunday comes around and she starts, and there was no conversation with me about any of that. At this time, I was getting back from an ankle injury, and I remember in that moment I felt extremely betrayed. I was so angry. But the next week I journaled about how apathetic I felt, how indifferent I felt, classic depressive symptoms. And on top of that, my partner at the time was still going out and drinking, and there was an incident that had happened where I got upset at her one night and turned off my phone, only to turn back on my phone to her trying to drive home, crashing her car. So I opened that text message, and from then I would have anxiety anytime that she'd go out and drink. Classical conditioning. So I had that, wasn't sleeping very well, then had that trigger of feeling betrayed. And a week later, when it was my first game back, my athletic trainer was taking my ankle and she said, whatever you do, just don't get injured today. Immediately my mind was like, ACL. And lo and behold, during that game, I did my ACL again. So here I am, I'm expecting to have a really good senior year. I'm playing really good soccer despite the ankle injury that I had. Was in a relationship, captaincy that I wanted, and pop goes my knee again. And I obviously knew what I was in for, and I didn't know what I could do. So from that moment, I became extremely numb. It was okay for about 6 weeks because I was still able to exercise. I made a decision to try and play without my ACL. I was in the gym every single day for weeks, for about 6 weeks before I tried to play. So I was still getting that endorphin release. I was still involved in my team. I was still having a laugh. I was just giddy and completely numb. I couldn't feel anything. And because I just didn't care. And then we lost the grand final, and we got back at, I think it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and then I had surgery booked for 6 a.m. in the morning. So not a lot of time between, mourning the loss of losing to then having surgery the next day. So once I had surgery, things started to spiral out of control pretty quickly. My partner, who couldn't be there for herself, then couldn't be there for me. I could no longer be there for her because I couldn't be there for myself. So you've got two people in a relationship that can't be there for one another. And once I couldn't exercise, I was no longer getting that endorphin release. So I couldn't exercise, my coping mechanism was no longer there. I lived in another country, so family was in another country. School wasn't stimulating or challenging me, and I reached out for help with my friends. And I said to them, hey, look, I'm really not doing well, I'm really struggling, can we catch up for coffee? Oh no, sorry, I'm too busy, I'm sure you'll be okay, you'll get through this. All those words, positive words of affirmation, whatever else, didn't help. I needed people. My sports psych at the time, who was a massive mentor of mine, we used to talk every single day, and she used to tell my parents, you don't have to worry about Nick, I'll check in on her after surgery and I'll make sure that she's okay. She went missing in action. When my mum flew back to Australia, she was nowhere to be seen. I would reach out to her and she just wouldn't be there. And I later confronted her about it, and she got really uncomfortable. She was like, oh, you know me, Nick, if I can't be there 100% for someone, I'm just not going to be there for them. But meanwhile, she was there for my teammate, the one who had an eating disorder. So I was like, that story doesn't check out. And I think what it came down to was that because she was a sports psychologist sports psychology consultant and not a psychologist. She felt like she didn't have the skills to deal with me, in essence. But what I needed was not a psychologist. I was seeing one of those. What I needed was a friend. I needed a mentor. I needed people around me. And they just didn't know how to support me, because how do you support someone when they're in that state of mind? Fast forward to just before Christmas, I was feeling extremely homesick, but I decided to stay in America because I couldn't fathom leaving my partner to experience her first Christmas without her mum. So I decided to stay. I told my parents that I was really struggling, asked them if they could send my brother over, and flights, it just wasn't feasible. Then the day before Christmas, so Christmas Eve, I was telling my parents, I was like, hey, I think I need to start seeing a psychologist more often. And they said, why is that? And I said, because I'm really not doing okay. And they didn't know how to respond, so they changed the conversation. And I don't fault them at all for that. You know, they live in another country, they didn't know how severe my state of mind was. It's not like I'm sitting there being like, hey, these are the things I'm doing. Hey, I'm self-harming. Hey, I feel like I don't want to be here anymore. We don't say those things. You know, when someone's struggling, you're not going to blatantly be like, hey, I'm suicidal, because often you don't have those words, nor do you know that you're at that state. And then a couple of days later, an incident happened with my partner, and I was calling her non-stop. She didn't answer her phone. So I did something which then ended me up at the hospital. I was very fortunate that my Norwegian friend, that she, despite being in Norway, she answered the phone at 6 a.m. in the morning. She then contacted my doctor. I then got taken to hospital. I then got institutionalized for a minimum of 72 hours. So in America, when you get taken in on a suicide attempt, you have to stay for a minimum of 72 hours. I was furious. So I was probably just as angry then as I was when I felt like my coach had betrayed me. Because I vividly remember speaking to my brother saying, if people fucking listened to me, I would not be here right now. I reached out for help, but no one listened to me. And maybe that wasn't fair of me to say, but in my eyes, I was reaching out for help. It's just that people didn't know how to respond. But from their perspective, I was never blatantly open and obvious about, you know, the state of mind that I was in. Because again, we don't have those words. So I spent 5 days in an institution, spent New Year's in an institution, which was interesting. Not the way that I had envisioned entering 2015. My dad flew over, which I was very fortunate for, because I can't imagine being a parent and getting that phone call. But the thing is that we never really spoke about the fact that that wasn't a suicide attempt, it was a cry for help. My cries for help before that weren't heard. I told people that I wasn't doing okay, nobody paid attention. I was self-harming, people didn't think that that was concerning enough. I told my psychologist that I was self-harming and she didn't seem concerned enough. So for me, in my eyes, I then had to take it to the next step that would get people's attention. Started then seeing a psychiatrist, then went on medication, was seeing a therapist, a new therapist, but I knew that that wasn't my rock bottom. And it wasn't until 6 weeks later that leading into Valentine's Day, there was an incident with my partner. Again, the relationship became extremely toxic because she couldn't be there for herself and I couldn't be there for myself, so we definitely couldn't be there for one another. So we went on this sort of toxic cyclic behaviour of we would get into these massive fights on the weekend and then we'd be fine during the week. And it was because my comfort and my safety was having her there, but because of her anxiety, she had to stay away. So those two were just not compatible for one another. On the Thursday, so it would have been Thursday the 12th of February 2015, I had booked in to get my car serviced, to get a new clutch in my car. So I was driving there, but I was running a bit late because I think I'd made breakfast and coffee and lunch for my partner, and she was like, I thought you said you had to leave at 7:30. And the tone that she said that in, I just felt, you're so ungrateful. The reason I'm running late is because I've done all of these things for you. You know, it's not because I just couldn't get out of bed. Like, here I am trying to be nice. So I then internalized that as she's ungrateful, she doesn't appreciate me. I went to this car place and the guy that does the clutches wasn't there. So I was trying to call my partner to say, hey look, you don't have to pick me up. Tried texting her, she didn't respond. driving home, I saw her car, I then turned my car around and I snapped at her and I said, if you answered your phone, you would realise you don't have to pick me up. So her having anxiety, she shut down after that. And she made a decision, she's like, well, I'm not coming home tonight because, you know, I don't really like the way you've spoken to me. That's not how we communicated. That's obviously in hindsight, that's what she was communicating by staying away. And her not coming home was obviously a trigger for me. So my anxiety was really high. I thought, you know what, Nicole, take some time for yourself. So after coaching that night, I then drove to Panera, left my phone in the car. I was like, let's just calm down, read a magazine. Went back to my car, checked my phone, and I had all of these missed calls from my roommate, from the police, from ADT security, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, what's happened? My alarm had gone off at the house, and so the cops had called because they were called because they couldn't get a hold of me, couldn't get a hold of my roommate. So I'm freaking out, I'm like, oh my God, someone's broken into my house. I then text my partner and I say, this is what's going on, the police are at my house, I think someone's broken in. And I then rush home and I have no idea what I'm expecting to walk into. You know, you're in America, there's guns, who knows what you're expecting. My partner, I was hoping that would come home after that to check in on me to make sure that I was okay, and she didn't. I then called ADT security and I said, can you please just stay on the phone with me while I enter the house? Like, I don't know what I'm expecting here. I don't even know what I walked into the house with, because what's going to be a gun, really. Turns out that I don't think anyone had broken in. I think it was just that the wire had been triggered or something like that. But again, I really wanted my partner to be there, and she wasn't. And I then turned around and said, she was like, you know, I'm staying at my friend's house. I said, oh, I just want to let you know, like, I'm not sleeping alone tonight either. And I knew the intention of that message, but the intention was never for me to sleep with anyone else. The intention was me to sleep with my cats, or my cat at the time, sorry. Crazy cat lady, yes. But it was, I was hurting. And instead of me communicating and say, hey, I'm really upset, can you please come home? I then reacted, and that's what I said. Now, naturally, she's going to shut down when she hears that. She didn't talk to me the whole next day. I was really struggling. It was then Valentine's Day on a Saturday, and I said, you know, happy Valentine's Day, can I please see you? I'm so sorry for what I said, that was out of line. And she said, maybe, you know, she said, not today, maybe tomorrow. And I said, if I make it till then. And turned off my phone, didn't respond to anyone, and the whole next day, didn't have my phone, and was hoping that when I came back from coaching that I would see her car in the driveway, and I didn't. So I'm thinking, you know, I've literally basically threatened suicide, and not trying to condone that behaviour at all. It's very manipulative, 100% acknowledge that. And when I left the coaching that day, I said, I'm too hurt by your absence, I'm too far gone, and I left that note on my bed. Went to coaching, came back, her car still wasn't there, and I thought, I just need to get out of this house. I can't be in this house right now because I'm going to do something stupid. Went to McDonald's, finished watching Gossip Girl, and wrote a letter. So basically just poured my heart and soul into this letter and said, you know, imagine the couple that we'll be if we can get through this. Imagine the people that we'll be if we can get through this. I'm so sorry for my behaviour. You know, I'm getting better. I'll get help. Poured everything I had into this letter. Then went home, checked my phone, tried to call her, no answer. Tried to message her and said, you know, please, can you answer? This is really important. This is a matter of life or death. Contacted a friend and said, hey, do you know where my partner is? I really need to see her, it's really important. And again, nothing, no response from either of them. Then I saw that the friend was on Facebook, and I saw that she was active. So I took that as she's seeing these messages, but she's ignoring them. So in that moment, literally something clicked within my brain, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. The pain is too extreme, and I just need to end everything. I wrote then on the note, and I said, but you ended me. Left that on the bed, left my phone on the bed, got in my car, and the only thing that I could think about for the next, I don't even know how long, was just, I need to end everything. This pain is too much. I can't handle this anymore. And ironically, the thought that kept me alive was, imagine your parents getting that phone call. Imagine your parents getting that phone call that their only daughter in another country has ended her life. And that disappointment, which was something that I felt so strongly growing up, was actually the thought that kept me alive. I then showed up at a friend's house who was extremely high at the time, so I'm not sure how much she actually helped. I then drove to campus trying to find my Norwegian friend, climbed through her window because no one was there, left a note on her table explaining like I'm not doing okay but I'm safe. Was explaining that I was then going to my doctor's house, so I showed up at midnight with a hood on, which in America is probably not the smartest thing, but can't say that I was thinking very clearly. And the minute that she answered the door, she was like, "Oh my God, we've been so worried about you." And I was like, "We? Like, what do you mean?" Because for the past 2 or 3 hours, all I could think about was just surviving. Well, surviving, but also ending my life. And then when I saw everyone the next day, everyone was really upset. I'm like, why are you guys so upset? I'm still here. I don't understand why you guys are so upset. And that's probably a bit of the opponent process theory in the sense of when you experience heightened emotions, your body doesn't like that, so it tries to counteract that, and you experience the opposite. So, in a scary movie, when you are scared, you then typically laugh afterwards, and that's your body trying to regain homeostasis. So for me, I was at the worst point of my life, so the next day I was absolutely giddy because my body was trying to counteract what it was that I was feeling on that Sunday night. And so that was when I hit rock bottom, which was February 15th. And I remember thinking, what's worse, being in a relationship or being single on Valentine's Day, or being with someone who doesn't want to spend Valentine's Day with you. But in reality, what I did and how I was completely unfair to my partner. I in essence blamed suicide on her, which, given that her mum had blamed cancer and dying on her, that was pretty fucked up. And it took me a while to forgive myself for that, because in the context of it, I was unwell, and I had been unwell for quite a while. That was sort of the rock bottom that I needed to know. Well, I guess once you've hit rock bottom, you've got one direction to go in, which is up. I then started seeing a therapist twice a week, so I was seeing therapists individually, but I was also then seeing group therapy, or seeing people in group therapy. And it wasn't the individual therapy that helped me get better, it was the group therapy. So I guess if I look at what helped me get over that or get better, it was the connections. So my professor at the start of the year was absolutely incredible. I told her that I'd been institutionalized, and she said to me, she's like, "Nicole, I'd really like to meet with you once a week just to check in with you, see how you're going." And she knew me so well that, during one of the weeks where she was extremely concerned about me, she said, "Hey, I'm going to send you an email this weekend just to check in and see how you're doing." And, typically you think, oh, someone's going to say, "Hey, how are you? How are you feeling?" Like, that's checking in. She knew me well enough to know that I really enjoyed intellectual stimulation. So she asked me a question that would get me thinking and distracted from whatever it was that I was feeling. And the question was, when someone graduates with a degree in psychology, what skills do you think they should possess? Now, what a multifaceted question, that's great for my brain. And she was brilliant throughout all of that. Every single week, whether it was the Monday or the Wednesday, she would be there for me. My Norwegian friend, I put her through absolute hell. I would frequently say, "No one's there for me, no one cares about me." Meanwhile, she's there. She's showing up, she's not judging me, and despite everything that I was saying, despite how much I was pushing her away, she was still there for me. The group therapy helps because it wasn't just an individual person that you're talking to. You've got those friends and those connections that you're building, the people that you care about, who are going through similar, who, you had to report to that group if you had been self-harming. So all of a sudden, you're being held accountable for your behaviour and you don't want to disappoint anyone. My cat helped a lot. When I didn't have anything to look forward to, I would come home and my cat would greet me in my car, or my cat would come running, and I just remember feeling so gracious for having him, because he seriously helped me through some of the darkest days of my life. I read a book, A New Earth, which profoundly changed my life, and it's changed my life both times that I've read it. I was on medication for a period of time, so for about 6 months, and the other big thing that really helped was changing my environment. So being in college, being in that environment was a trigger for me, because I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't feel accepted. I felt like I was annoying. Anything that I tried to implement was it was too much. And when I deactivated social media after I did my ACL, my teammates were like, why has Nicole blocked me on everything? Instead of asking, is Nicole okay? Why doesn't she have social media anymore? And that's just a level of maturity where people internalize and it's like, why are they doing this to me, rather than thinking, hey, hang on, what's going on with this person? Why might they be behaving this way? I then had to I did my rehab off of campus, because everything about campus just reminded me of my entire college experience. And it took me 2 years after I graduated from college before I wanted to wear any of the college clothes again, because I was so upset with my experience there, with the way that I was treated, with the way that I didn't feel like I belonged. And those things can help, because when you can't get healthy in the environment that made you sick. And so the other big thing that helped was my partner then broke up with me, or said that we were on a break with the intention of getting back together, but I'm thinking that we're over now. It's been a few years. And that helped, because all of a sudden I wasn't getting better for her, I was getting better for myself. And that was massive. And I think sometimes in order to truly heal, you do have to be by yourself so that you can get better for yourself. So I guess, why am I sharing all of this? Why is this relevant? And I think in regards to mental health, I think that we focus on the wrong side of the equation. So much of mental health is focused on the individual struggling. It's, hey, you've got a problem, you need to learn to talk about your problem, and you need to tell me what's going on. And it's like, I can sit here all day long and I can tell you absolutely everything about myself and how I'm feeling. At the end of the day, if you don't know how to respond to me, guess what? That's going to determine whether or not I'm going to open up again in the future. And yet everything, or so much of mental health, is focused on the individual and equipping them with skills to communicate. Communication isn't the key, comprehension is key. And so it's that willingness and that ability to understand what it is that that person is going through. One of the startling statistics that I found when I took my mental health first aid course was that 80% of people that take their own life have communicated with someone within 2 weeks of doing so, that that's what they intended to do. So to me, the problem is not communicating what's going on in your life. The problem is being there for someone when they're struggling. And I think that there's a massive deficiency in society on having those skills to be there for someone. So if I ask you, or how many people here have opened up to someone and they've responded poorly, and it's made you think, oh, I'm never going to talk to someone else about this? Yep, so most of us, yep. What did people say or do that sort of shut you down?
I'll get back to you.
Oh, you get back to you.
Well, I think you said about being like positive, like being like, it'll be fine, you'll get through, which maybe isn't.
Yep, changing the subject, yep.
Or they like throw it back on you. They say, oh, well, that's your issue and you have to sort it out.
That's your responsibility, yep.
Or they make it about them.
Yep. Relate it to themselves. Might be their ability to try and empathise, but fails miserably. Yep. More important. So minimising what you're actually going through. Yep. And what about how people responded that have made you feel better? Can we think about those times? It's a lot harder to think about that, isn't it?
Sometimes it's not talking, it's just like having a go or something.
Yep. So just being there, really.
Yeah.
Showing up, not necessarily saying anything, but listening. So there was a study that they talked about where 2 people were put into a room and one person was only allowed to respond with, tell me more. And within that 15 minutes that they were in that room, that person ended up resolving their own problem, purely for the fact that that person just listened. They didn't try to fix, they didn't try to solve, they didn't try and feel any positive affirmations or anything like that. They just gave them the space to be themselves. Simon Sinek talks about how there's an entire section in the bookstore devoted to self-help. And he's like, where's the section for helping others? So much of mental health is, again, focused on the individual. But focusing on the individual, I think, is what is making us miserable. If you think about when I was struggling, it was when I was focused on myself. It's only when I had other people, when I had those connections around me, that I started to get better. When I had people that could respond to me. But the thing is, most of us don't know how to respond. If someone came to you and said, hey, I feel suicidal, how many people here would feel comfortable knowing what to say back? Not many people. Maybe 1 or 2. Or if they said, hey, I'm self-harming, this is what I'm doing, most people would be like, oh, I don't feel equipped to deal with this. I'm not a psychologist. So do we think that psychologists are the only people that have these skills to be able to handle those conversations? No, right? They're not these superhuman beings. They're human beings at the end of the day. So my question is, are these skills not things that we can teach people to help them support others who are struggling? And my answer to that is, I was trained as a crisis text line counsellor in the States. We went through a 6-week training program where we would respond to people who were in moments of crisis. But one of the saddest things that I found was that a lot of people use that crisis text line just to have someone to talk to, which made me think, are we doing that poor of a job in society that people have to text a crisis text line in order to feel heard and seen? And the reality is, yes, we're extremely accessible these days. We've got technology where anyone can contact us at any hour of the day. But how many of those friends do you feel like you could call if you're in a moment of crisis? Can you call your psychologist when you're in a moment of crisis? No. Well, maybe you can. I don't know about the ethical guidelines for that. But the people that are going to help you get better are the people around you, the friends around you. But so much of our friendships, or so many of our friendships, probably feel ill-equipped to handle those sorts of conversations. And that's what's led me into the work that I've been doing probably for the last 6 months. Is I've designed a 2x2 hour training module to equip individuals with skills of how to support others when they're struggling. So the first module is, in essence, creating a safe environment. So again, Brene Brown, who here's heard of Brene Brown? Yep, so Power of Vulnerability. She's it's an amazing TED Talk, I highly recommend it. She talks about vulnerability being necessary for connection. And I take that again one step further. So how hard is it to open up to someone when you don't feel safe first, or when you don't feel comfortable? It's pretty hard, You need that person to sort of, you want them to build that rapport with you to make you feel safe and comfortable. And so for me, the biggest focus that I have probably been focusing on in the last 5 years has been on this idea of safety. So growing up, I felt like I never belonged. When I was in college, I focused a lot on love and belongingness. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, who's heard of that? Yep. So you've got physiological needs at the base, and then you've got safety, love and belongingness, self-esteem, and then self-actualization. So I always thought, focus on love and belongingness. Excuse me, sorry. This is my voice. I'm talking too much. But over the past couple of years, safety has been my primary focus, because I feel like in order to feel like you belong anywhere, you first have to feel safe. So if you think about your workplace, if you think about a team, sporting club, right? If you have a coach that yells at you when you make a mistake, are you going to be afraid to make a mistake again? Absolutely. If you've got a teammate that yells at you when you make a mistake, are you going to be afraid to make mistakes? Absolutely. But if you have a teammate that encourages you when you make a mistake and understands, hey, you're human, you're going to make mistakes, it makes you feel safe, it makes you feel comfortable. And unless you feel safe, you'll never reach your excellence. And for me, in the past couple of years, what I found is that there's 3 pillars to to making someone feel safe. Non-judgment, non-reaction, and taking an active interest. So in regards to sport, it's that non-reaction. If someone makes a mistake and you don't kick the chair if you're a coach, or you don't yell at them, you just say, hey, you've got it next time. Or maybe you have a quiet word with them afterwards and be like, hey, is everything okay? Check with them. I've noticed that you're a bit down at training. And you see them as the whole person rather than as just your teammate. The active interest is not, hey, I'm here if you need anything. I'm going to stand in my little comfort zone over here, and I know you're struggling. I know that you're going through a really difficult time, but you will figure out what you need, and then you can tell me what you want me to do for you. It's almost like a narcissistic approach of, oh, I don't want to step outside of my little comfort zone and see how you're doing, because, I might not know how to respond. And is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. Have there been times when I don't know what to say? 100%. But what's wrong with saying to someone, hey, I really don't know what to say right now. I can't imagine what you're going through. Acknowledging the humanness that you don't have to have the answers, but you do have to be there. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is to show up for other people when they're struggling. When it comes to mental health, if you're concerned about someone, if you're worried about them being suicidal, just show up. Show up at their house, or probably let them know that you're doing that first. Just say, hey, I'm coming over. Some people might have issues with that, not speaking from experience. But it's the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 error, right? So type 1 error, I don't know the difference between the two, but there's the analogy that I'll use is a smoke alarm, right? You'd rather have a smoke alarm that goes off when there isn't a fire than to have a smoke alarm that doesn't go off when there is a fire, right? So you'd rather take action and there not be a crisis than to not take action and there be a crisis. And I think, you know, that statistic of 80% of people communicate that they're not okay or that they're thinking about suicide within 2 weeks of doing so. I think to me that just shows we're doing something wrong. You know, it's not about communicating the problem, it's about reading the signs and being there for other people. And I think, you know, why does suicide affect me so much, or why do I get so upset by it? It's because, as you see from, or maybe you can see from my experiences, that it wasn't a conscious decision. You know, I never wanted to die. I'm petrified of death. But I got to a point where my brain was literally saying to myself that the only way to end this pain is to end your life. Now, that's just the ultimate paradox, because we're tailored towards survival. And fortunately, I made it through that night. You know, I made it through the darkest night of my life, and I was one of the lucky ones. There are people out there that don't. And I think the reason that breaks my heart is because life does and can get better after that. It doesn't always, but for the most part, it does. And I think about my life since that moment, and it has been so much brighter, so much richer, so much more fulfilling because of what I went through. And I think that's why it's so upsetting. And I think, you know, we need to start looking at a different side of the equation when it comes to mental health. Instead of putting all the onus on the individual, we need to focus on our role in helping people to feel safe to talk about their problems. If someone isn't talking to you, maybe look at yourself and be like, how can I make this person feel more comfortable? You know, what can I do to make this environment more safe, or safer, sorry. Let's not talk about that, let's edit that one out. But that's probably most of what I wanted to get across today.